Hey guys, and welcome back to Tennis 360, news podcast, QualityShot Tennis, where we talk about all things tennis. My name's Anthony Hirsch.
And I'm Eliza Wastcoat.
Welcome back to the podcast. So we have a few things to talk about this week. We had Guadalajara, we had Laver Cup, we had a few other things going on. We have some big tournaments ahead as well in China, so we're going to go over all of that. And the big news this week is Guadalajara. Sakkari getting her first title since 2019. First title as a top player. The last time she won a title, she was outside of the world's top 50, and she finally gets the win in a tournament that really was a really weird tournament to be at WTA 1000, but still Sakkari got the win, and all credit to her.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, there's a temptation to look at a depleted player field and sort of like put an asterisk next to her name. But, ultimately you compete against the players that show up and are in the best form at that tournament. And, Jabeur couldn't take advantage of her opportunity as the number one seed there to go ahead and have a good run. And I think, Sakkari came into this tournament as only the second top 10 player off of a bad, first round exit at the US Open, was really feeling mentally pretty weak, pretty unstable. And, had a good go of it in San Diego. She was competing there without her team. And then comes down to Mexico and obviously gets the title in good fashion in straight sets and across the way. And, first title she's gotten in 4 years with her coach. So, big mental barrier for her to get over. I think, yes, it's a depleted field. And one always questions, like, what would have happened if we'd had more of the top 10 competing. But at the end of the day, it's still tough to win those types of tennis matches, especially when you come in with like, oh, here's my opportunity. The field is so depleted. Everybody's expecting a top player to get it done and to win. That is quite a bit of pressure to play under, especially given kind of the season she's been having and the performances and results that could have easily kind of overcome her. So congrats to her for her first title, only her second WTA title, and for someone who's been inside the top 10 now for the last few years. Really important to see her kind of push on and make a change. And hopefully, I think she said some good comments about how she listened to Coco Gauff's US Open interview, where Gauff had said, there's much more important things in life than tennis and winning tennis matches. And she said that really helped her put her own tennis into perspective. And sometimes it's easy as a tennis player traveling across the world. It's your life, it's easy to lose a perspective on what it is that you're actually doing at the end of the day. And so I think for Maria, going back to the basics, it's a tennis match. You love this sport. Let's have fun. You're a warrior, like you're good at competing. And so hopefully that'll help her really switch things up mentally for the rest of this season, have a good go at trying to qualify for the WTA finals. And one can only hope that this helps her turn a page on future tournaments, that she can really start bringing home titles. She's 28 now and kind of needs to start happening for her if she really wants to solidify a legacy within the WTA.
Yeah. I agree with everything. I mean, I think the negative emotions can get in the way of her. She starts yelling at herself, and that translates to errors, and the mental side can be a big thing with Sakkari. And it's great to see her overcome that. In the final, she was showing a lot of positive emotion, really trying to get the crowd involved. And I thought that that's a really good sign for her. And yeah, like you were saying, it's a depleted field, but still it's a tournament at the highest level, and you still have to beat who's in front of you. The pressures, the mental pressures on you are the same. The points that are on the line. So it was great for Sakkari to be able to overcome that. And then there's also a good run from Caroline Garcia, who also hasn't been in great form recently. She found some really good form as well. It was an interesting tournament. Yeah, she did. Yes. And Sakkari needed it too. I feel like the mental kind of strain on Sakkari, if she couldn't figure it out one more time, I feel like it would have been really tough for her to kind of turn that around. This is her sixth final just in 2022 and 2023 alone. This is her third WTA 1000 final. But whether 1000 or another final, she just wasn't able to find a way through any of those finals to pick up a title and go all the way, even though she was making lots of finals. So if she couldn't do it one more time against Caroline Dahlheid, who's been really impressive this week, actually, but who was ranked outside the world's top 100 at the start of the week, if she can find a way there, that the momentum, it would have been really hard for her to find momentum to keep on winning titles. But her finding a way at this tournament, even with the depleted field, is going to really give her a lot of momentum moving forward. And I think she'll think of it as a WTA 1000 title. That's how she should think of it, even with the depleted field, because you can only beat who's in front of you, and Sakkari did that.
Exactly.
So,
and I think, you know, the women's Masters tournaments this year has been won by a different player each tournament. Like nobody's won two Masters tournaments this year. So it just shows you how much variety, how much depth there is within the WTA field and who's winning and picking up these types of titles. And it shows you how difficult it is, right? That, you know, that even the top players aren't winning back-to-back Masters titles within a season. So I think, you know, not to take away anything from Sakkari there, she should think of it as a 1000. She got her body in the right position to be able to compete this week, which not everybody else was able to do. And, you know, she also did come through a top player in Garcia, who, as you mentioned, has really been struggling this season. In 2022, she was back on the rise, did really well through the grass court tournaments, got to, I think, the semis at the US Open in 2022. And this year it just hasn't been the right stack of cards for her. And I know right before the US Open, I think a close family member of hers passed away. And so that contributed to, you know, just some personal life and challenges that one faces. And so it's kind of hard to regroup and try to find some momentum again. She was really playing some good tennis. You know, ultimately got beat up pretty badly by Sakkari in the semis. Just too many unforced errors off of her racket, just couldn't control the ball. But yeah, Garcia is another one of those personalities that is really great for the WTA Tour. She won the WTA finals last year. She's now, with this run to the semis, back inside the top 10 just about in the live ranking. So, you know, not the season she would have wanted or hoped for, but, you know, showing that there's signs of resilience there and hopefully some opportunities to turn that around the remainder of the season.
Yeah, totally. I think, Caroline Garcia was showing a lot of potential, I think, after she won the WTA finals with her very kind of aggressive game style, very creative as well, taking a lot of returns very close to the service line. I felt like she could really pick it up and turn it into something really kind of massive. And we just didn't really see that come to fruition, I think. But and also, I think it was a Cincinnati title last year as well, I think. So, it was kind of unfortunate to see it go down. We've seen a lot of players who do really well to end the seasons at the WTA finals as winners not have great seasons the next year for whatever reason. But hopefully now that we get to faster courts and indoor courts as we go to the end of the season, hopefully Caroline Garcia can start finding her good winning results as well. So I think that's going to be, and I think that's something to look out for as we get to the faster courts that really do her game very well as she steps inside the court and is just uber aggressive. That's been going to a lot of errors, and she's just not really been able to find her game and play very effectively, get the depth that she wants to on her shots. But now she's finding the right kind of level. But yeah, Guadalajara was a weird tournament going in, only 2 top 10 players playing, Sakkari and then also Ons Jabeur. But it's good to see finally those Sakkari have the good form that she hasn't really had recently. Hopefully Ons Jabeur can find some of that form as well. Although she had a good win over Alicia Parks early, but then she lost to Trevisan, who had a good week herself. And it the Guadalajara resulted in some good runs from players you wouldn't really expect to have very good runs in a 1000. But it was that was interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one worth highlighting in there is Sofia Kenin. She had a good week in San Diego the week prior, made the final, lost to Krejcikova in a tight 3-setter. And then here she made the semis. So she's up another 22 points to be ranked at world number 31. So she's back inside the top 40 for the first time since January of 2022. Huge for her, obviously, after winning the AO, has completely fallen off a cliff. And we've just not seen her play the same level that we would have wanted to. So fantastic for her to have 2 good tournaments back to back, both at a 250 and then a 1000. So hopefully she'll kick on from here and and bring in some good momentum moving forward. I think also, as you mentioned, some kind of depleted field and some newer names that folks may not be familiar with. Caroline Dollarhide, the American who made the final, ended up losing to Sakkari. She's been ranked inside the top 100 before, just reached her career high ranking, I think, in May of this year, but has kind of been yo-yoing around. She's 25. Yes. She's really been grinding hard on the Challenger Tour. Just really, kind of trying to get into the top 100 consistently, make it into the draws of these 1000s and slam tournaments. And so this run will move her up to 42 in the rankings if she can maintain that for the end of the year and really put herself in a good situation to have some good warm-up tournaments in the run-up to the AO, and then even make a couple rounds at the Australian Open. That would really solidify her place as a top 100 player. She's a lot of fun to watch. She's also a good doubles player. Someone who you should kind of have on your radar is, an individual who could kick on and, pick up a couple maybe smaller titles here and there next season if she's kind of able to make that consistent transition inside the top 100. So great result for her. And then also the other name, which I mentioned last week, who needed a good run was Taylor Townsend. She made it to the third round, narrowly missing out in 3 sets as well. But she's now back inside the top 100 for the first time since becoming a mom. I always love those stories. Love our moms back inside the top 100. Obviously, she's a top 10 doubles player as well. And I do think, she's a lefty. I think she has the game and the power and the weapons to push on inside the top 100 and really make a good name for herself within that. And win a couple titles next year, maybe. So we'll see. But I think that was great to kind of see her take advantage of a depleted field and make sure that she got her name inside those rankings.
Yeah, she's been doing really well in doubles, but in singles, it hasn't really been there for her. But obviously, she has the hand skills that are amazing, and she has a lot of power on her shots. So that's very good to see from Townsend. I didn't know that she was breaking inside top 100, but yeah, Dollarhide, very big player, very booming forehand that we saw in that final as well. It was actually a close final for that first set. I think it was nearly an hour first set, but before Sakkari got it done. But Dollarhide played very well. Was also playing pretty creatively, serving and volleying, serving from near the doubles alley, running around to hit a forehand on the returns. It was very good stuff from Dollarhide, very promising, very fearless. If you didn't know beforehand, I don't think that you would have really known that it was who was the player playing inside for first WTA 1000 final. She really played really kind of like she was a veteran already there for a long time. So that was good to see from Dollarhide. And I think there's also like Arango reached the quarterfinals. I think there were names that a lot of people, even tennis fans, hadn't really heard of before that had like good runs in this tournament. So it's just like kind of wild. And there's actually another WTA tournament going on the same week, Guangzhou, I think. And that's was the WTA 250 that was going on. I think that tournament, obviously, although WTA 250s in general, I think now top 20 players can't play in them. I would like to say, if that's right, but I think that there were a lot of names in there that I think because Guadalajara was going on the same week, weren't that familiar with or at the top of the rankings. But in Guadalajara, even there were a lot of names making it far that you wouldn't really expect, like Trevisan as well, who I mentioned earlier. Although Trevisan has been as high as top 20, top 25 in the world, but at this point, not particularly expected.
Yeah, certainly interesting choices in terms of what tournaments players are choosing to play in the kind of finalization of this calendar year. You have a Masters 1000 going on that has a depleted field, but when players are making their assessments as to which tournaments they're going to make, you don't necessarily know who's pulling out and not pulling out. And I think sometimes, those players who are ranked, let's say like 80 to kind of 40 in the world, they might look at the scheduling and say, hey, I'm going to base myself in Asia. I'd rather play the 250 in Guangzhou in China, then I'm moving on to Tokyo and back to China. And I'm going to kind of base myself there for the month of, September, October, avoid a lot of traveling around. That's, it's a lot of budget to go from US Open to San Diego to Guadalajara to Tokyo to China. And then, so kind of following the tour around. So I think there were a number of players that perhaps made their plans to play in Guangzhou and then saw the draw in Guadalajara and thought, oh man, maybe I missed an opportunity there, including players like a Lynette, who was the number 1 seed, perhaps would have had a good run in Guadalajara. So that's kind of how the mix ended up that way, where we had a couple higher ranked players that were competing in a 250 rather than the 1000 that was going on at the same time. But nonetheless, still a kind of good tournament there, where Chinese player Wang did win the title. So before last week, the 22-year-old Chinese player had an 11-21 record at tour level this year. She'd slipped to world number 88 from 49 in January, but she'll move up back to world number 58 with that title. That's her first WTA Tour title, so congrats to her for getting that done in front of her home crowd. And Lynette's a good player. She's made a couple runs at slams before, and she's very consistent, kind of tricky to play against. So good little tournament there, and big boost in terms of her points. That'll really help her finish off the year in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think that was a great tournament. Any kind of 250, while a big tournament like 1000 is going on, is always a good opportunity for players to kind of take advantage of draws that might not be as full if there weren't tournaments going on the same week. So I think that that's a good thing for sure. And then, like you were mentioning, I mean, the kind of tennis schedule, the players bounce around from city to city. You can forget how hard it is actually to travel and get the resources, get the money, and actually put in the effort and the work to travel from city to city. And sometimes it's just not worth it. So, yeah, I think players took advantage of what they had in front of them. Absolutely. And I haven't seen Wang play very much, but what I have seen of her, she's been very impressive. So, and then we can then talk about Laver Cup that happened this year, this week as well. So Laver Cup, after 4 years of there being Team Europe kind of just completely taking the advantage and people not sure if Team World was ever going to stand up to it, now Team World just cruises to an 11-2 win. They only needed 1 win on the final day. They got that in doubles to start the day with Shelton and Tiafoe. I mean, it was not. It's like it's something that I always thought might happen, because obviously when you have Federer and Nadal playing for Team Europe, obviously it seems like, Team Europe is completely unstoppable. But now that Federer is retired, Nadal is a bit older, he couldn't play this year either. Zverev's not playing. He was a great addition to Europe as well. Team World, I think, finally found a really big advantage in the event, and there were no top 5 players playing for either side, which was kind of interesting. Rune and Tsitsipas were supposed to play. Fokina and Fokina and Arthur Feast, who was an alternate, they took their spots. But I think that it was really interesting to see Team World get the win. And I think a lot of it came down to who Team Europe was putting in, for example, to play for doubles, like players like Davidovich Fokina, Arthur Feast. I feel like they didn't have a lot of experience playing doubles, and that was pretty apparent. So I think that was a big part of it. But yeah, Team World getting the win 11-2. I was happy to see it as Team World here from the States. I was happy to see Team World get the win. But it was certainly exciting, and it's going to be interesting coming into next year and who Team Europe gets to play for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we want to talk about depleted fields. Laver Cup was certainly one that was depleted. And especially when you take a look at, Team Europe, obviously Monfils is a fun, entertaining addition, but he's not ranked inside the top 100 at the moment. We have, Ruud and Rublev kind of being those top folks, but, you would pick out some of those, Davidovich, Fokina, and Feast as weaker links there. And, it's understandable why Zverev wasn't going to compete in Laver Cup. He has points he needs to get to try and solidify a top 10 year-end finish. Rune is injured, but, you would hope next year that you would see a stronger field from Team Europe that would include either a Tsitsipas, a Zverev, maybe a Djokovic or a Medvedev, or, even your Zverev or Rune in there as well. So I think, depleted field, I looked at that lineup and I just sort of thought Team World should have this in the bag. You also, as you mentioned, had players in there that I think, know each other well, that have better doubles experience. Obviously, Shelton, coming from college tennis, has doubles experience. I think some more of those American guys like do play doubles here and there for a little bit of fun. So they were always going to have a bit more camaraderie to share amongst them. I thought the tension between Monfils and Auger-Aliassime was pretty interesting. So for the folks who didn't see that, Auger-Aliassime, just for context here, he really hasn't had a good season. He's really kind of underperformed at the majors, hasn't gotten a title under his belt. And this time last year when he played in Laver Cup, he had really good performance. He was like player of the tournament, and it kind of was a springboard for him to go off and finish the year with a couple titles and do fairly well to round things off. And I think maybe he was looking at this opportunity the same way as like, I need to get a win here and kind of try to give myself some energy finishing the season. So he was playing Monfils. It was early on in the first set, and Auger-Aliassime was asking for ATP like time rules to be implemented. I think Monfils was sort of taking his time a little bit in between serves. He was, trying to play entertainer as Monfils does. And Auger-Aliassime's like, I want to play. I want a serious match. And Monfils is like, I'm here to have fun. And they were going back and forth. He's like, well, I don't know, who brought you here and what they told you this was, but I want to play. So I thought that was kind of interesting because obviously it's an ATP recognized tournament, but there's no points on the line for it. It is kind of a glorified exhibition tournament. So what did you think? I don't know. I was I felt it might have been like a little much from Auger-Aliassime, like to kind of try to be that intense, but at the same time I understand where he's coming from. What did you think?
I thought it was interesting. I thought the most interesting part about that was who the two players on the court actually were, because you would not expect kind of what would you call it? Kind of an interaction, confrontation between two players to be from players like Auger-Aliassime and also from Gael Monfils. I mean, Monfils always just so nicely mannered on the court, and Auger-Aliassime barely ever speaks or lets out that much emotion on the court. It's like, it was hard to even believe what we were watching. And it was first, of course, Auger-Aliassime coming to Monfils and saying Monfils needs to speed up. But then it was Monfils actually was coming over to Auger-Aliassime's side and saying, trying to confront him and say, come on, this is not so serious. And the interesting thing about it is, it depends on the person, like how seriously they take Laver Cup. It's like, it's not like the US Open where it's like everybody would be like, oh yeah, take it seriously. It's not like necessarily like Hopman Cup back in the day, or like one of these exhibitions where if somebody does something funny, it's like nobody is gonna completely just like, nobody is going to necessarily shout at them or say that was a bad thing to do. I think that is a big kind of thing that made it interesting, was that is Laver Cup something that needs to be taken that seriously? Obviously, it was started by two of the greatest who ever played, Rod Laver and Roger Federer, and it's played in honor and in spirit of them. So in that way, you definitely should take it seriously. There's a crowd that came to watch. It is listed in ATP head-to-heads when a player wins and loses. Like you said, the event is ATP sanctioned. So it's hard to say what's what, but I thought it was very interesting, entertaining. I actually sided a little bit more with Auger-Aliassime just because I felt like I don't know. I felt like if you've come to play there, then you should know what everybody is expecting, and I think the more expectations that it is to be taken a little bit more seriously. But it was interesting. I didn't side hugely with either one. I was just happy to see it due to how entertaining and surprising it was. It was like, wow. And it did bring up an important conversation. How important or seriously taken should the Laver Cup be?
Yeah. It's a good question that anybody that plays can answer. And, I think very contrasting personalities. Like you said, it's interesting based off of who they are. And I think, we know Monfils thinks of himself as the entertainer. He likes to get the crowd involved. He likes to do his little tricks, like you see him at UCS. He's dancing. He's got, and I think he probably thinks, a Laver Cup is asking me to participate because of that reputation, because the fans like to come and see him kind of get the crowd involved and see him be a little fun and kind of have some character. They certainly didn't select him because he's the most informed player from Europe at the moment who's available to play. So I think it's like, whatever the organizers and the team selections thought when they selected him, maybe their priorities didn't align with, the field of players that were currently involved and kind of what their ambitions were for the tournament. And yeah, maybe Monfils was told something a little different before he was plugged into the team. But, either way, I think good to see that Auger-Aliassime is wanting to be out there, wanting to compete, wanting to change the trajectory of how his tennis is looking at the moment. Obviously, a win over Monfils isn't really going to be, catapulting him to new heights per se, but he needs to find some momentum and some improvement in his mental approach. And if he feels like he needs to use an exhibition tournament to get himself right, then so be it. So that was kind of the outcome there, and he ended up taking the win. So just a little drama and gossip on the sidelines. But I think it's interesting then to talk about with Laver Cup. How's it been going over the last couple of years? Did people enjoy it this year? Might there be a different team captain for Team Europe replacing Borg over the coming years? What's that going to look like?
Federer expressed interest.
Yeah, and we talked last week about might this be a tournament that could be a mixed tournament and kind of evolve in its format as well. So interesting questions coming out at the end of this Laver Cup.
Yeah, and I just got Federer came in. It was a 1 year anniversary of his retirement from last year when he retired, and he left a mark on the sport that even though he's gone, he's never really completely gone because of how influential he was in some ways, you could say. But he did retire last year, and he was saying, hey, maybe I could be captain one day. Maybe I can take over Borg. And Borg is a little bit, he's not a McEnroe type where he's like super bombastic. In one way, it creates a contrast, but in the other way, you do want somebody who is there a little bit more as a spectacle, because at the end of the day, Laver Cup is a bit for entertainment and spectacle. Like you said, it is a bit of a glorified exhibition. I think with time, that's going to be the best answer to how seriously the Laver Cup is going to be taken. I think over the next few years, we'll get the best answer to it with how much attention is going to be paid to the tournament, how seriously the players take it, who's going to be playing. If we do get a top 5 player playing into the tournament this year, I think next year, if we get a top 5 player playing next year, I think one of the big reasons that Monfils did play was because we did have a few withdrawals going into the tournament. I think Monfils was a bit of a late addition. They probably should have told him something like, think of this kind of more closely like Davis Cup or something, and then maybe he would have taken it a little bit more seriously. But I think either way, because at the end of the day, you are playing for a team. But I would be interested. Let us know in the comments what you think and what you think of Laver Cup, that whole kind of FA versus Monfils discussion. But yeah, that was definitely interesting. Something interesting that happened. And then, just to round off kind of this week as well, we also had a couple of ATP 250s. We had, they're going to have their finals tomorrow, but we've had a few results coming in. Next week, we could probably just brush on quickly about kind of what goes down in the finals, who wins those titles. But we have Zverev taking on Sapulin in the final of Chengdu. And we have Khachanov, who is taking on Nishioka in the final of Zhuhai. Khachanov's back. Khachanov was in great form. He was very promising to me for a long time, really up until he had an injury. It's really good to see him back in form. He made the He made the semifinals of U.S. Open, Australian Open, made the quarterfinals of RG. Played really a fantastic match against Djokovic in the quarterfinals there, who of course went on to win the title. But he couldn't go quite all the way, but he was up a set on Novak, nearly went up 2 sets, but Djokovic got the best of him in the tiebreaker. But he's in good form. He's only played 1 tournament since Roland Garros. That was the US Open, lost in the first round. But it's good to see that. And then, Zverev continues really good form and is looking very close to his old self. Do you think he's kind of coming back to like where he was back in the day? I think he's close. if not there. I'm not sure he's quite there match in, match out, but he's coming really close to where he was at.
Yeah, I think he is right about there. I think, a player is always going to reinvent themselves a little bit coming back from such a serious injury. I think he's implemented a couple new things in his game. He seems much more willing to come forward and come to the net, even if he's not winning all the points. He's doing it more often, which with a guy his height and his serve, he should have that type of skill set in the locker that he should be executing against. So good to see him in that way. He seems to be moving really well. His fitness is much stronger. And, we know what his weapons are. And it's always been a question with him as to how well he controls his mentals. And yeah, maybe he's playing with a little bit more joy and a little bit less expectation. I think when players come back from injury, again, there's a new perspective of like, I'm just really happy to be out here on the court and out here competing as opposed to, sitting on the sidelines. And sometimes it takes an injury like that or a moment in somebody's life to happen in order to, be grateful for the situation that you're in and play with a little less pressure and play with a bit more joy. And that's kind of what it seems like he's doing at the moment. He's taking advantage of the tournaments that are available to him, and he's making deep runs in the ones he's participating in. So, maybe not, 100% the Zverev that was in the semis of Roland Garros, but, based off of what he's recovered from and the trajectory he's on, I think, we'll start seeing him well inside the top 10 on a consistent basis now. And whether he's able to push on and win a big title, that's another question. But obviously he has won the ATP finals a number of times. And so he is in the hunt or in the race to try to get back to that. And he would fancy himself in a round robin format to pick up another title. So good for him. So he's on a good run.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Zverev, he's definitely playing more aggressively. Even on the clay course, we saw him coming in a whole lot more. I remember in his quarterfinal match against Echeverry, which was very high level match. He came in, I think it was 42 times, won I think 31, 32 of those points. I remember that statistic. So he was coming in a lot. Like it was crazy how much he was coming in that match. I think that I think it would be very exciting to see him back at the top of the game in the perspective of him taking on players like Novak and Medvedev. He's already had a few epics against Medvedev this year. I think that's exciting. And I'd say one thing is Zverev and Dimitrov have played a few times this year. Dimitrov has really only lost to a lot of top opposition this year. He lost to Dimitrov lost to Zverev at Roland Garros. He lost to Zverev. I forget where it was. It could have been Cincinnati or New York. But it's not a good matchup for Grigor, who really is playing great tennis, but he's never going to win on those backhand rallies. And I think I don't know, something about the way Zverev just sets up his points and plays aggressively and breaks down Dimitrov's game. I feel like Dimitrov can't break through Zverev's game at all. So shout out Grigor because he keeps losing to Zverev. They've played like 3 or 4 times this year.
It happens.
They play in the same. Yeah.
So I don't know. Sometimes players have your number. It's like Swiatek and Ostapenko. Like how on earth does Ostapenko have 4 or 5 wins against Swiatek? You think of every other player profile and you're just like, that's bizarre. But sometimes that head-to-head or that matchup just has a player's number. It gets in their head and it's just perfectly suited for one over the other. So poor Grigor, like he's been having a great season.
Yeah, I mean, like Swiatek Goff until Goff finally got the win. So maybe Dimitrov will find his time. So, but yeah, that was something. And then also and then Zhuhai, as I said, Khachanov finally back. He got the win over Korda yesterday. Khachanov and Korda have had some epics back in the day, but this yesterday was not quite that. But Khachanov has been in really good form, and Nishioka, who hasn't had a great season after a really good season last year, winning Washington, etc., but finally finding some of that form once again. Karatsev as well there. So a few interesting players getting some good runs. And then, all right, let's go to power rankings. Talk quickly about our power rankings for this week. All right, and now for the power ranking section of the podcast for Tennis 360. So this is based off of Guadalajara. This is based off of the couple of tournaments in Chengdu and Zhuhai, and this is also based off of the tournament of a Laver Cup a little bit, even though we were saying it is a little bit of a glorified exhibition, but it's still a tournament. I feel like you can still put a little bit of weight into and see how the players are playing. I mean, if you saw, for example, Fritz taking on Rublev, both players were taking it very seriously, and for whatever reason, it is counted into the ATP head-to-head. So those things all take into account. So for the top three, we all have me and Eliza both have we both have the same top three I'm seeing here. But then when we get to number 4, I have Zverev in front of Sinner. And Zverev moved up to number 4 in both of our lists, which is interesting. Zverev, of course, getting to the final in Chengdu. So it makes sense, and Zverev's been having really, really good form. Cincinnati semifinals, had a close match against Djokovic. U.S. Open quarterfinals, I'd like to say. U.S. Open quarterfinals. And he's just been playing really good. Also got a title at the German Open against Jera like a month ago. So, Zverev's been in really good form. And, what do you think about Zverev, if you want to quickly touch upon it?
Yeah, I mean, it's what we said a little earlier. He's having a good back half of the season, making the most of his comeback. So, recognizing some positive performance there and his ability to take advantage of these next couple tournaments. I would expect him to kind of continue to play well. It's a little tricky sometimes with these power rankings because our top players don't play in and out every single week. But some of this is with an eye on the Masters next week, and that's why we don't have as much movement in the first kind of top ranked couple of players. But I had Rublev over Sinner just because he was in action this week. Obviously Laver Cup, but still like to give a little bit of a nod to the folks who are competing. Same thing with me moving Fritz up 1, got a good win there at Laver Cup. So he's competed, he's moving. And then that's kind of where we have some differences. Right as I was looking at this for a second time, I was like, it's interesting. Neither of us have Ruud or Rune inside our top 10 for the power rankings. And those are 2 players that, are just about inside the top 10. Rune's not had a win since Wimbledon. He's been nursing a back injury, a nasty one to be fair to him. But, he's not having a good back half of this season. And Ruud similarly exited early at the US Open. He did manage to beat Tommy Paul, so maybe he deserved a nod this week over Paul. But I don't know. I fancy the momentum of Paul at the moment, especially on the hard courts. I think that's his surface. And I don't know how much emphasis to put on an exhibition match. Right. And I see you snuck in Hachanov. I snuck in Shelton. I just wanted to give another nod to him. He's just so much fun to watch him play, and I really think hard courts are his surface. This was his first year on the tour. It doesn't surprise me that he didn't have any wins on clay or grass courts really, or not more than a handful. So he's getting familiar with the tour. I'm not sure how he'll do in the Asian swing given kind of travel for him and back half of this season. He might be a little tired, but I think he really has the game to progress from here, and I hope he takes advantage of his new high ranking and can kind of push on and continue to rise up.
Yeah, for sure. I think Shelton is definitely a good choice. I mean, he had the winning shot of the Laver Cup, putting Team World to victory. He had a lot of matches there. He also had the first win of Laver Cup as well, just reached semifinals of the US Open. So that makes sense to me. For sure. I had Hachanov coming in because he's only played 1 tournament. This is only his 2nd tournament since Roland Garros. Up until Roland Garros, he was playing phenomenal semifinals of where was it? Either Indian Wells or Miami. I believe it was Miami. Semifinals Miami, and then also semifinals of it was Indian Wells, semifinals of Indian Wells, and then also, like I said, been doing really well at the major, so his results were there. Really impressive game as well, from the back of the court especially, but this week, his net game has been really showing as well. He's been coming in a lot on the faster courts. I wanted to give a nod to Khachanov, and then also Fritz. Fritz really impressed me in that win against Rublev at the Laver Cup. I wanted to move Fritz up, and I wasn't feeling that crazy about Demon or Rublev right now. And then Tiafoe. I also moved Tiafoe in, and I knocked out a few players. I wasn't that crazy about Rublev or Demonor, so I moved them down. Then I also moved down Tommy Paul as well as Dimitrov was in there, and I felt like Tiafoe had a good week at Laver Cup. That's kind of where I was at on the men's side. I felt like Fritz can move up. But like we were saying the other weeks, outside of the top 3 players in the world, even the top 4 or 5 players in the world, I feel like it's really hard to say who really gets in there. It's just whoever catches your eye in the moment. And for me, I feel like those players like Taylor Fritz, Rublev, Demonor, they've been having good enough results that I feel comfortable still keeping them in there. Demonor in Los Cabos in Canada having good results. Like I mentioned, Khachanov before the injury. So those were some of my men's players.
Yeah. And looking at the WTA, neither of us have many movers, but we have new additions. Yeah. So both of us put Sakkari into our top 10. You have her at 6, I have her at 7, capturing a first 1,000 title. That's great. I think she's continuing to compete post that US Open, as we talked about. So to me, fully deserving to be inside our power rankings for this week. And I also added in Kenin and Garcia. I know you added Kenin as well. Kenin's had, 2 back-to-back tournaments where she's made good runs. And I think she's, she's shown over the last 2 slams as well that she's in and amongst it, and she's on the road to recovery. Her new ranking inside the top 40 is going to help her out a lot with draws moving forward, which should help her to continue to climb the ranks. She certainly has the skill set to be a top 20 player next year. And Garcia, I wanted to give a nod to her for having a good run in a 1,000 tournament, kind of regrouping again post US Open and getting over some personal situations that are challenging. So to me, felt I think I swapped her with Madison Keys, who just didn't compete this week. So that's why I don't have her up in my lineup. But I think Keys is still another one to watch for these upcoming tournaments as well. She's certainly closing in on a top 10 spot, and things are tight at that end of the rankings for the women.
Yeah, Madison Keys has certainly been like a top 10, top 15 mainstay big hitter, but I can understand. Yeah, I kind of probably prioritized a little bit more kind of, even if they haven't played this week, but with power rankings, it makes sense to put in the players that actually had good performances this week. Yeah, similar for me. I had Sakkari, and then I also had Kenin coming in. Sophia Kenin, really impressive in her comeback. I mean, she had the win over Sabalenka in Rome where she looked really good, but then since then she was kind of up and down. But in the last like 3-4 tournaments, she's only been on the up. US Open, an obvious one, but in other tournaments as well. Shout out to Kenin. Those were Sakkari has to be in there. I mean, even though Sakkari hasn't been winning titles, let alone winning the WTA 1000s where she's been reaching the finals, I mean, she's been a top player, and she was as high as number 3 in the world last year. So it only makes sense to put Sakkari back in. Also, she had the Washington final. I didn't put Garcia in, but that's only because Garcia hasn't been doing it that much week in, week out. I felt like this, if she shows it to me again, then I'll definitely put her in. But she had a good week. She didn't have to face that much top opposition, but still run to the semis is a good result for her and better than what we've seen recently from her. That's the power rankings.
All right. And moving on, we can talk about what's coming up this week. So we're going to split up kind of our upcoming section and the culture section to kind of give you guys a really good preview of what's to come. Often from an outsider perspective with tennis, people think, oh, Grand Slam season's over, things are kind of wrapping up, nothing really counts. Well, things count, and things are getting serious when it comes to players trying to finish their year inside the top 10 and also trying to qualify for the year-end finals. So we'll split it up into talking about what's coming up this week. Then we'll look at the details of that race, and then we'll talk about the Masters to finish it off. So on the WTA side, there's a WTA 500 and ATP 500, and then there's also 250 tournaments that are happening side by side. So for the WTA 500, we're in Tokyo. Some controversies here because they have decided to implement performance buys. This is something I had to look into because I also didn't really understand it. Performance buys essentially give a buy to a player who's competing and has performed well in a tournament that happened the previous week. And this rule has been around, I think, since like 2009, but they don't always consistently use performance buys for tournaments. So I'm still a little confused as to when the WTA decides to use them and not use them, depending on the tournament. And it also depends on how the WTA schedules their tournaments for that year. Having said that, though, it is Sakkari and Garcia who received performance buys. And in particular, the player who was frustrated as a result of this was Elena Rybakina. Rybakina being ranked number 4 or 5 in the world. She did not receive a bye, despite her ranking being higher than Sakkari and Garcia. That's because she did not play the Masters tournament in Guadalajara, and so they gave the nod to the players who did. From a kind of outsider's like perspective, initially looking at this, I'm like, you know what? Like, these players are in Mexico and they have to get to Tokyo and start playing, and they just, played a final on Saturday afternoon. That's an insanely fast turnaround. That's halfway across the world. The time difference is massive. And players need more than 24 hours to be able to recover. I mean, it would be crazy for Sakkari to be playing today in Tokyo, having played a Masters 1000 final on Saturday afternoon. So to me, it seems fair. But then you also have, Rybakina has posted on social media, so has her coach, basically being like, isn't your ranking your performance buy? Like, haven't I earned that based off of the fact that I'm higher ranked and I've been playing all these tournaments and performing well? So like, what's the difference? And I also understand that point of view, because it's like, she's done that over a whole season. She's in this position because she's been at a high level performance for a consistent amount of time, and they're giving preference to somebody who just had a good week last week. So interesting kind of controversies there, but at the end of the day, it didn't even matter, because Rybakina has now completely pulled out the tournament, citing niggling injuries that are ongoing, and so she's not competing, having already qualified for the WTA finals. So perhaps she doesn't have much incentive left to play.
Yeah, but she did mention on her Instagram story, she said, you know what, I'm pulling out of Tokyo, but you know what, I'm still upset, and I'll be talking about the situation with the WTA and the fact that they didn't let me play in the tournament. I think that that's an interesting situation anyway. I think if you have rules, then you should have consistency with them. So I think that's something that I think with both tours, I think we could have more transparency and more consistency across the board with the rules that they are putting in place. I think that would be something that would be good to have. And to be honest, I think although I understand the difficulty and logistics of players like Sakkari and players like Garcia, who are going across the world basically to travel, it is them who scheduled their tournaments like that. And although I understand the difficulties there anyway, I would say that you have to, if you are helping certain players out, it has to be around the parameters that you aren't making it unfair or hurting another player who do deserve those buys anyway. So Rybakina, for example, she should have a buy with where her seeding and her ranking is at. I just think that should remain. And outside of that, you can help out those players who are traveling, if that makes sense. But you can't hurt Rybakina in the way. So I felt like it was an unfair towards Elena Rybakina. I feel like we have to have consistency with the rules. I feel like we have to have transparency, and also I feel like making it so that making these performance buys kind of put Rybakina kind of at an unfair kind of side of everything.
Yeah, I think you make a fair point. And I think either way, there just needs to be more consistency. Obviously, they're trying to incentivize players playing more tournaments, not opting out of tournaments. It's tricky. I just think there needs to be more intentionality and more planning. You know, perhaps if you've got a tournament, especially a Masters tournament, who you would hope most of your WTA, you know, top players are going to play, which didn't happen this year. Maybe one could have thought, let's start the tournament on a Tuesday and finish on a Sunday instead of do a Monday to a Saturday type of format. Just kind of some small adjustments either way to try to allow enough time for players who are playing in both tournaments. But as you say, you know, at the end of the day, players choose for the most part which tournaments they're going to compete in other than the compulsory or mandatory ones. And so, you know, if Sakkari took a look at the schedule and thought, I'm going to play Guadalajara and Tokyo, then she might have factored in that, you know, if I win this tournament, perhaps I would pull out of Tokyo, or, you know, it's confusing as to why the performance-based buy is implemented at some stages of the year and not others. We didn't see that with the back-to-back Masters in Cincinnati and Montreal. So I'm still confused and don't have a complete answer as to like when they implement these things. Is it because of time travel and distance between the tournaments? Because it seems like it was on the fact sheet for a while, but strange to kind of see it implemented. And then, as you say, hurt a top player like that. She was drawn against, I think it was Noskova, who's a decent young player as well. So that wouldn't have necessarily been an easy first round match for Rybakina, who has had some injury struggles. So she brings up a fair point, and kind of interested to see how the WTA is going to react to that.
Yeah. I agree with everything. I think, it's just we do want more transparency as to when the rules are implemented, and we'll see what comes of that if Rybakina mentions that again.
Yeah, so we've got, just to finish off on Tokyo and Japan, that we do have top seeds competing here, Swiatek and Pegula back in action as well. So a couple good matches to pay attention to. Then we've got the 250 WTA tournament that's happening in China. Top seed over there is going to be Jabeur. She desperately needs points, as we'll take a look at. Kvitova takes the number 2 seed, and Castella is in the mix as well after she had a good run in New York. On the ATP side, we also have a 500 that's in China, and then a 250 that's in Kazakhstan. So in China, we have Alcaraz, Medvedev, Ruud, Rune, question marks a little bit there, and Sinner amongst those who are scheduled to play. The draw for that is coming out tomorrow, and qualifying is also happening tomorrow with Vukic, Wolf, Purcell, and Arnaldi in action. Top seed in Kazakhstan is going to be Greek Sport, along with Baez, Manarino, Bublik, Korda, Lehechka, and Dominic Thiem is also in the draw with a potential tasty second round matchup with Wawrinka. Wawrinka is going to face Giron in the first round, but winnable match for him, so that could set up an interesting second round match. So with that being said, let's take a look at the race for the WTA and ATP finals before we preview the Masters that are coming up next week. So starting with the WTA side, already qualified, we have Sabalenka, Swiatek, Goff, and Rybakina. Those who qualify are our top 8 players. So in the mix for qualification are Pegula, Vondrousova, Mukova, Jabeur. This is all in order, by the way. Sakkari, Keys, Kvitova, and Bencic. So we've got a couple more 500s, couple 250s, and then one more Masters left to go in order to finish up qualification. Do you have a gut feel on which of these names are going to round off the top 8?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting question. Although I would note that Ons Jabeur at 8th is a good 300 points ahead of Sakkari at 9th, and Sakkari is a good 300 points ahead of Keys at 10th. So that, I think, is important to note. But yeah, I think it should be interesting. I mean, Sakkari is certainly finding good form and momentum. I'm unsure about Jabeur at the moment, so I think Jabeur is somebody who honestly could be a little bit of a liability there, somebody that could be passed. I think Vondrousova, although Vondrousova played well at U.S. Open, so I don't know if that's fair necessarily to say that she might be that I should have a distinct worry that she might drop off. But if I was to guess, I would think Sakkari would be my gut feeling that she's going to continue off the momentum. Like I said, if she didn't win that title in Guadalajara in Mexico, then you never know. But I think that not only is that a win that's important for her to not kind of fall off in these finals and just start having a lot of really kind of substantial mental baggage that will really put a permanent kind of marker on her career. I think also it's a very positive thing, in which I think finally getting it done is going to lift a giant weight off her shoulders and be like, hey, I'm here. I've been number 3 in the world. I can win these titles. And the fact that she knows now that she can for sure win these titles is a big weight lifted off of her. And I think it's going to be a lot of momentum moving forward. So I got Sakkari on the women's side. And but I would also shout out Madsen Keys as well at 10th. But my gut feeling goes for Sakkari. And I think she will pass at 9th in the race right now. Will pass Jabeur at 8th. Although hopefully Ons can pick it back up. But that's my gut.
Yeah, interesting. So I think Pegula is definitely going to qualify. She could get qualification wrapped up this week with a good performance in Tokyo, and I would expect her to get things done. And then, I think the names that, could shift around are from Vondrousova, Mukova, Jabeur, and Sakkari. As you say, I think Keys is a little bit out of touch. I would be surprised if she, made 2 deep runs at this stage in the season. I think Vondrousova just needs, a couple more decent performances and she'll be in a safe space. So for me, as you say, it's Jabeur who's really the one that's at risk. I think that's why she's playing the 250 this week and not the 500. I think she's just trying to, rack up some points and try to get her into a safe zone, get herself into a safe zone and gamble that, Sakkari won't have a good week in Tokyo given her deep run in Guadalajara. So interesting to see how how the women's kind of race is going to come to a head, and their Masters is starting in Beijing next week. And as I mentioned earlier, we haven't had any player win 2 Masters titles this year, so it's very much up for grabs. Hard court, different kind of environments and conditions. I think Guadalajara was very high altitude, which would suit Sakkari's game. So interesting again to see how she might perform at a more of an indoor-based tournament in China. So a lot still for the women to compete for, and somebody could have a good month and make a surprise run inside that top 8 because things are really not wrapped up yet. On the ATP side, in terms of qualification, we've already got Alcaraz, Djokovic, and Medvedev who are 100% qualified. And then our list, again, it's pretty tight between the 4th and 8th spot. We've got Sinner, Rublev, Tsitsipas, don't know how he's still in there, Zverev, Rune, and then the next block is Fritz, Ruud, de Minaur, and Paul. I would say that is very congested between the 5 and the 9 spot. I mean, there's barely, 100 points between some of these players, and a good run at a Masters and a good run at a 500 here could really shake things up. I think for me, the ones that I would worry about wobbling is Rune, Tsitsipas, potentially. And I don't have much hope for Ruud to get himself back into the mix. I think Taylor Fritz, he's only 45 points behind Rune, given his form, good match against Rublev, good run at the US Open. He doesn't have to play his nemesis Djokovic, who seems to always wipe the floor with him. So good opportunities. Also, Djokovic is not looking like he's going to be playing that 1000 tournament in Shanghai. He hasn't confirmed yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's not.
Yeah, he confirmed he's out of Shanghai now.
Okay, so
three tournaments left.
Shanghai with no Djokovic in the mix, which hopefully makes it for an interesting tournament. Medvedev defends the title there. Hard court surface. Zverev again, opportunity to kind of push on here and try to make it inside that finishing in the top 8. So really interesting way to round up the year between these players. And as I mentioned at the beginning, people think that the tennis is over after the slams, and it's very much not. Still a lot to play for, still a lot on the line, tired legs involved. And so these players are going to want to try to get one of these 2 tournaments under their belt with a good run so that they can finish up qualification and take a week or 2 off before finals in October, November.
Yeah. I think the really interesting thing is that not only is it super tight, but also you don't really know who's in form and who's in form going into the indoor tournament specifically, which I think makes it really interesting coming into Shanghai. I think that Rune, for example, you would think he's going to do really well on indoors, but actually for him, the health side is more of a factor. For Tsitsipas, you might say the mental side is probably more of a factor for Tsitsipas. So it's like you don't really know for sure. I mean, I would think that Sinner is going to qualify. It seems like he's almost he's nearly 1,000 points ahead of the person in fifth. So he has a good chance of qualifying. And then Rublev and Tsitsipas are pretty far above the board. I would agree. I don't really know how Tsitsipas is that far up, although Australian Open final would definitely be a good reason as to why. But aside from that, I don't know where he got the other 2,000 some points from. But that's but yeah, I mean, all these players, it should be interesting. Zverev is doing well. He's climbing up in the rankings. He's at 7th in the race at the moment. But yeah, outside of that, I think it's up for grabs. I think it is up for grabs up until, for example, the 12th spot with a guy like Tommy Paul, Alex de Minaur, two guys that really love the indoor events. Stranger things have happened, especially with a lot of the players above them being out of form. For example, if Tsitsipas and Rune don't find it together towards the end of the season, then that could be 2 spots open, the top 8. And just with 1 or 2 really good runs from de Minaur and Paul, Demon already reaching a Masters final, you never know. Stranger things have happened, but I think it'll be interesting. I don't really know exactly what's going to happen, which makes it super interesting going into Shanghai on the men's side. I would expect Zverev, Sinner, Rublev, and the big 3 of the season, Medvedev, Djokovic, and Alcaraz, who already are in there qualifying. But yeah, after that, Rune, Tsitsipas could be replaced by any of the names, Fritz, Ruud, if not Demon or Paul. So it's going to be very up in the air. And like you said, it's not finished after the majors. The tennis season keeps going, and it's a little bit unfortunate that the majors are so there's such a big disparity in between the hype for the majors and then also the hype for the Masters. So I think that's a bit unfortunate, but they still have the highest level players in the world playing. And also you have different surfaces, different crowds, different atmospheres, different stories, different things going on. So these tournaments should always be interesting for the person who really cares about the sport. And we'll see which players get the points to get to the finals.
Yeah, for sure. And it's worth them also keeping their name in the mix, even if they don't get that automatic qualification. It does happen that players get injured and pull out. Alcaraz wasn't able to play ATP finals last year, which allowed Fritz to get in the mix. So you never know. You want to be in and around that. You certainly want to finish in the top 10 if you can. And so really good opportunity for some of these young guys to get in and try to kind of solidify their name and place within those rankings. So exciting end of the season. Certainly makes it an interesting watch, and a lot of good tennis left to play before we head into the winter break.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, Alcaraz didn't play last year, so we could see him for the first time at the ATP finals. That would be exciting as well. And I think indoor hard courts is always faster courts for me make for a lot of really interesting shot making. You have like players at the highest level. I mean, at the lowest level, the faster courts create some pretty abysmal play where it's like they don't really know how to play and get the shots in. But at the highest level, the players have to improvise, they have to adapt, and that really creates for some really interesting shots, creative shots. And I think the indoor hard courts are going to be really interesting to see, even faster courts of Shanghai. So super excited, and also on the women's side with Beijing and the indoor courts for them as well. But yeah, this has been Tennis 360. I've been Anthony Hirsch.
And I'm Eliza Wastcoat.
And thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it. And don't forget to subscribe as well. We'll have more stuff coming up. We will be covering Shanghai. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter as well, where we do coverage and all of that. Follow us on socials. And see you guys at the next one.
See you guys.